He had raised these great kids, had a business that was successful.
I just was like, my world just changed.
And then everything crashed like a house of cards.
I am so excited about this series that's happening because here's the thing. Every story, this whole series is called This Is Us. If you weren't here last week, I'd love for you to hear the intro. But in This Is Us, we're going to hear 6 different stories of real life people who live, they're part of our church. And you're going to hear what's been happening in their lives, what we feel like. And this is the idea around the series. We feel like when people are introduced to who Jesus is, not who sometimes the church portrays who Jesus is, because that's been hurt sometimes over the history of this world and history of religion. There's so much stuff that people kind of push back on Jesus. But what we feel like, and you can see this, when Jesus met people, back when he was walking around Israel in the first century, when he met people who were so far from religion, people who are outcasts, people who were nothing like him, they suddenly went, wait a minute, this guy's different. And they liked him, and their lives were impacted by him. And what we've discovered is that has kind of continued into today. And we feel like if we can introduce people to who Jesus really is, it impacts people's lives. And if here's why it's kind of attached to you being generous and giving. Thank you for doing that, because you've helped us in a high school create a place where people are able to meet Jesus, who he really is, and their lives have been impacted. So if you invest in what's happening at Citrus Point, you kind of have a part in every story you're going to hear over the next 6 weeks. And I just wanted to say thank you. And this is the best way maybe to say thank you for you to hear some of these stories. So thank you for that. Now, what I'm going to do is, because I'm not speaking this morning, but I want to introduce you to who is speaking this morning, who's going to share his story. His name is Jeff Borden. And he kind of reminds me of someone that Jesus interacted with in the first century. Many of you have heard of, or maybe you haven't yet, but the Apostle Paul, he's a famous Christian who lived in the first century. He was famous for writing sort of 2/3 of the New Testament, all these letters. He was famous for taking the message of Jesus to the known world around that time. Super famous guy. But before he did that, he wasn't known as Paul. He was known by his Jewish name, Saul. And he was a very educated, strong leader who had religion as a big part of his life. But for some reason, he had pushed Jesus far away, and wanted nothing to do with Jesus until he met him. And when Jesus interacted with Paul or Saul, there was this really fascinating little exchange that happened. And I want to read you a couple of verses in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 9, that Luke portrays what happened when Paul met, or Saul met, Jesus. And it says this: Saul was on his way to Damascus, and he hated Christianity, he hated this whole Jesus thing, but he met Jesus. And it says this: he fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And then Saul asked one of the most important questions that every one of us needs to ask. And it's this question that I want to leave you with as I introduce Jeff to you. The question is this: Jesus said, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And Saul said, who are you, Lord? Who are you? So that's the question I want to leave you with as I introduce Jeff Borden.
That was the first song I ever played in front of people. I played it in church. I played it because it was my father's favorite song. No, it wasn't his favorite hymn. It was his favorite song. My dad's a minister. I am a pastor's kid, a PK. And I grew up in the church. I grew up going to church a lot. Mondays, Wednesdays, prayer groups, Bible studies, all sorts of stuff. I was there. And I went into church as a kid, just sort of putting up with it, and eventually I started kind of liking it. So I got involved with youth group. I started to become part of the discipleship corps. I was a leader in my youth group. I then went on to college, and I became a choir director and theater director for a non-denominational Christian singing group. We toured all over the southwest part of the United States, leading people to Christ. I became a youth minister, a music pastor, a theater director in a church. I was waffling back and forth between seminary and the university, between becoming a pastor and becoming a professor, which is why it's odd to stand here in front of you today and tell you that 3 years ago, when I brought my family here to Florida, I didn't know that I believed in God at all. And I wasn't sure that I believed in Jesus as my Savior, let alone anything else. To understand why, you have to understand the frame of my life. The framework for my life, there's three things that I've studied over time. I've studied communication, I've studied education, and I've studied transformation. And as I study those things, I really try to put all the stuff that entails them into practice. And there's this concept around persuasion that was developed by Aristotle 2,000 years ago. Now, Aristotle had to figure out quickly how to persuade a group of people because if he didn't persuade the jury that he was talking to, the person he was defending would be put to death. So he had to figure it out pretty quickly, what it takes to actually persuade a group of people. And he said you need one of three things, depending on the audience type. You need ethos. There are people in the audience who demand trustworthiness and credibility. They need truth. And if your message has truth and trustworthiness, then people will be persuaded. At the same time, others in the audience need pathos or passion. They need to have their heartstrings tugged. They need to feel that emotional connection. So people use stories and narrative and things like that. And then still others in an audience need logos or logic. They need to feel that there's some sort of sequence or linearity to what it is you're talking about. And if so, then they will be persuaded. And if you have those three things in a persuasive message, which I believe Christianity is a persuasive message, then you will reach the audience. And my journey through Christianity can be seen very much through this filter, and I'd like to share it with you today. I really did start this very young. I was doing Kids Praise back before there were numbers. It wasn't Kids Praise 1, it was Kids Praise. Let's see, deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow Jesus. He is the way, truth, and life. That was 6th grade. I've really been doing this a long time. I got kind of excited about that sort of stuff, and so I went into junior high feeling pretty good about youth group and things like that. I played the trumpet, so as I kind of grew up, I had school, I played the trumpet. That's the year we won state marching band competition. But I was also a leader in our youth group. That's a picture of my high school girlfriend. She and I were leaders in our church group. We tried to lead by example. That's why we dressed like 50-year-old Amish people before this homecoming dance. I don't know. It was the 80s, all right? That's all I can say. At the same time, we went to this really interesting church. We went to a church that was best described as entrepreneurial. The minister, the head pastor, really wanted anybody who had a ministry to be given an option to perform that ministry. So he kind of set up a platform by which you could find funding, and then you could get volunteers of other people who didn't have a specific passion. They would join your ministry team. And pretty soon, Denver had 35 or 40 ministries popping up all over that were really making an impact. We had homeless ministries and unwed mother ministries, and all these things were really kind of clicking. As a result, the church grew like wildfire. We had 5 services, 6 services, 7 services. I actually got a chance to preach on Youth Sunday to 2 of the main services. I was 16 years old, and I did the story of Jonah. I worked it up with my youth pastor and my dad and a couple of other seminary grads, and I just sort of talked about what Jonah was, the ultimate patriot. He didn't want to give aid and comfort to the enemy, and so he left, he fled, trying to go the other direction. And I preached that sermon. That was my ethos and my logos. My credibility and my logic was really spoon-fed to me in this very sort of insulated bubble. I had all the answers to all the questions that you never ask. And I thought I was really on my way. It wouldn't be till I got to college that I started to experience pathos for the first time and really what that sort of emotional connection was. As I mentioned, I joined a Christian singing group and immediately became the director of that group. They were looking for a director. And so this is where I learned blades, jazz hands, blades. And we wore those. That was one of our tours. Again, it was the early 90s, so sorry. This was an interesting time for me. Because now I'm starting to listen to music I'd never listened to before. See, I didn't grow up listening to rock music. My first rock album that I ever purchased was Weird Al Yankovic's Eat It. I played the trumpet, so I listened to jazz and I listened to classical, which my father was terribly proud of, and he used to talk about it, but I just didn't do it. When I got into college, I started listening a little bit, but now I was being exposed to contemporary Christian music. And so I actually started to put some of these contemporary Christian songs into our plays. I would write the scripts, I would bring in the choral music, and we did all the standbys, Awesome God and No More Night and Majesty. But now we started to bring in things like The Champion by Carmen, which is the story of Jesus and the devil in a boxing ring, boxing and duking it out. And then we sang Watch the Lamb, which is the story of these two young boys who actually watched the crucifixion. And I sang the solo for Watch the Lamb. I'd never heard it until I got to college. And so I sang that as we went around from church to church to church all around the southwestern part of the United States. And I got to see different styles of worship. I got to see how people related to God differently everywhere I went. And for the first time with these amazingly powerful songs, I got to see people that were doing things I wasn't familiar with. They're raising their hands and they're saying, I want to get closer to you, God. Please let me get closer. And at the same time, they're getting down on one knee and they're praying, and sometimes they would cry. And there were actually a couple places we went where they would fall down prostrate on the floor and start writhing. And I thought, we are bringing the thunder. God is really working through these words I'm writing and these songs I'm finding, and man, we're singing them beautifully. And it's all that pathos, that passion, really, really getting at people's hearts. While that was sort of being developed in my brain, I had an opportunity to also become a youth minister. There was a church in the town where I went to the university, and my dad knew the pastor. They went to Dallas Seminary together. And so they needed a youth minister. They couldn't afford a full-time one, so they got me part-time. And so I went in there, and it was an interesting church. The average age, I think, was 62. The people really were more interested in the kids being seen and not heard, one of those kind of places. But we grew, and we did some fun stuff. We had 7 kids, then 12, then 20, then 30. We did lock-ins and scavenger hunts, and I led Sunday schools, and it was a pretty good experience. But here was the first time that my faith was kind of tested, if you will, that I had to experience something outside of my comfort zone or norm. I'll never forget it. It was the day that Jack, the head pastor, came into my office right before Sunday school. I was just getting ready, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, Jeff, I'm leaving today. And I said, where are you going? He said, no, I'm resigning today. I said, why? I'm sure the look of shock on my face was amazing. Why are you doing that? And he said to me, well, truthfully, I've met someone. I'm leaving my wife, and the church has rightfully asked me to step down. I'm going to announce it today in the service, and you probably will never see me again. I was blown away. I couldn't believe what was happening. He said, don't worry, the board's going to take care of you. They know what you're doing. They'll watch out for you, and then he left. Now, when that happened, something strange occurred in me that I wasn't prepared for. This had never happened to me before. A song entered my head, a song from that singing group, Masterpiece. This song started poking around in there, and it actually got on a loop. For the next several months, it played with great intensity, and then it's really never left me. The reason that it got on a loop and played with such intensity over the next few months was, as you can probably imagine, I was the guy brought in by the guy, and so my days were numbered at that church. They didn't really like him very much after that, and I was at those meetings when they talked so ill about him. And pretty soon, the new pastor came to me and said, it's not working out. We're going to have to let you go. The technical reason I was fired is because we left that window right there open during a lock-in. It was a Friday night. We had a lock-in, and then apparently it was one of those second-story windows where you just roll it open. It was open about this much for 24 hours. And since I disrespected the church like that, I obviously couldn't be an officer of the church, and so they let me go. When they let me go, word spread quickly. It was a tiny little town, and the university wasn't that big either. And so pretty soon, the Christian singing group I was leading heard about this. And so they, as college students are known to do, they held a secret meeting. They all got together and they talked about it and said, wow, if Jeff's heart is really, if his heart is bad, the church let him go. It's got to be his heart. We can't have a guy with a bad heart up there giving talks for people to come up at the end and become Christians. That's not appropriate. So they voted me out too. Within 8 days, I was cut off from all of Christianity. It was wild. But that song just kept playing and playing and playing in my head. Now, I'd like to play this song for you, but you got to know, first of all, it's a country song. And the reason that's important is because I am not a country music fan. I used to do stand-up to work my way through my master's program, and I used to say of country music is actually an allergic reaction to grits and illiteracy. Sorry if you like country, it's just a joke. It's just a joke. But that song by a guy named Bruce Carroll is called Who Will Be Jesus to Them? And it is country. And the reason that I say that it's country is because it shouldn't be that important to me, but it is. It plays in my head every week. It goes something like this. He came home from work last night to find that she was gone. Spending his first Sunday sitting in the pew alone. There are whispers all around him, his heart breaks in two. He's wondering who will reach out and help him make it through. Who will be Jesus to him? Who will show the love that restores him again? He doesn't need a judge, he needs a friend. Who will be Jesus to him? It goes on to talk about there's a woman who's got a reputation like the woman at the well. She's trying to find love with men, and she sleeps with a lot of them. And then she ends up at church. And when she gets to church, they judge her and they shun her because of her past, because of what she's done. And it culminates and says, there's wounded people everywhere. And when they look at us, do they see Jesus there? And I remember that moment when Jack told me he was leaving. And then at the ensuing meetings, I heard over and over again, wondering, who is Jesus to Jack? No one was following him. No one knew where he went. No one knew how to get in touch with him. Who was being Jesus to Jack? And then, when they fired me, I wondered the same thing. Who will be Jesus to me? Well, my pathway derailed a little bit. I decided not to go on with seminary at that point. I went back in to get my master's degree, but now I needed to find a new job. So I started doing stand-up. I started getting introduced to new kinds of people. I started listening to different kinds of music. Now I was listening to a lot more rock and roll and different alternative kind of stuff that was coming out. In fact, that song that they sang so beautifully at the beginning, Brother John, that is by a guy named Todd Park Moore. He is Big Head Todd and the Monsters, if you've ever heard of that band. And in the 90s in Colorado, they were a big deal. I got a chance to meet them through my roommate. He knew his younger brother, and I actually got to play with Todd. But when that happened, something weird happened. See, when you're playing or you're in front of people or you go to start going to concerts and you start seeing different things, things react in a way that I wasn't prepared for. See, Big Head Todd's known for songs like Circle. Rise and fall, turn the wheel, 'cause all life is really just a circle. And when audiences hear that song, or many songs like it, they do something that I wasn't prepared for. See, what I was used to was going into churches and watching people get excited about these songs that were really coming out now, by Hillsong, by Mercy Me, by Matt Redman. These songs you may have heard if you've ever been in a church, especially in the 90s anyway. Songs like Surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus? Or in awe of you be still? Will I stand in your presence? To my knees will I fall? Will I sing hallelujah? Will I be able to speak it all? I can only imagine, yeah. I can only imagine. And when I heard those songs and when I watched the audience react to those songs, that's when they raised their hands and that's when they fell down. And then I started going to concerts and I started seeing it in non-Christian venues. And I didn't understand. I actually had this moment where I felt stupid because I was watching a documentary that I'd seen before, and I realized if I'd been paying attention, I would have known this has been going on for decades. Right? Elvis, the Beatles, girls falling down and trying to touch a piece of their pants as they walk by. I mean, God, Rite of Spring came out, and riots happened in the streets of France. That was hundreds of years ago with no words. And I started wondering, wow, is this a God thing or is it a music thing? And so the pathos started to kind of crumble for me. Now, as all this is going on and I'm being exposed to new and different things, I actually got maybe called back, you might say. This guy calls me up and he says, hey, my daughter went to your youth group a few times. I'm a pastor of a little tiny church about 25 minutes from where you are. We don't have a youth minister, and man, we would really like you to consider coming to us and doing what you were doing over there, but we'll just love you. We want kids here, and we think that'll be great. And so it took a little while, but I finally talked to him enough, and I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And they were true to their word. They wanted kids there. When we left windows open, in fact, I think we broke some windows during lock-ins. The board members would come in and gladly fix it because the kids were there, and that's what they wanted. They were at the church doing stuff. That little church of 50 to 75 people, we sometimes had 50 to 75 kids there. And we grew this program from 6 to 30 to 50 to 70, and we had kids coming to our stuff instead of going to school stuff. They really, really liked what we were doing. It was so amazing. We packed this little church with 400, 500 people on Christmas Eve. And so I was excited about it. I always tried to find new ways to help with, now I wasn't just doing youth, I was doing worship, I was doing theater, and so I always tried to do new music stuff. I had helped the church go from all hymns to all praise and worship, and it was really an exciting time. I mean, don't get me wrong, I got some hate mail for doing it, really. But it was okay, it was all right, we were making progress. And so as all that happened, there was this song that I came across one day. It was based on John 3:30 that says, God must increase while man must decrease. And it was this really important kind of meaningful thing to me. I was studying up on it, and I was excited by Matt Redman. He sang a song, many songs you probably have heard if you've been in church. Did You Feel the Mountains Tremble? That Matt Redman. But he wrote this song about that verse. And I was excited. And I took that song and I tried to remix it a little bit. And I was kind of working it up, getting ready to debut it for the church. And things at the church were going pretty well. But in the midst of all that, I hearkened back to that story of Jonah that I preached so many years before. And one of my youth ministers, as he was prepping me for that sermon, he said, you know, Jeff, it's important to know that the world will always provide a way. There's always going to be a way to get away from doing what God wants you to do. Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh because they were the enemy, and he didn't want them to be forgiven and redeemed. He instead wanted them to die. So he fled, and there was a whale that took him away. And in my case, there was a whale. There was a girl. That sounds horrible. Not saying the girl was a whale. That's not what I'm, all right. Well, my wife might say, no, that's a different thing. There was a girl, and I got way too involved and way too quickly. Things got a little weird and out of control. There were things that I found out, secrets that got found out. The family got involved. They were weird too, and some odd things started happening, and then they were telling secrets, and I was telling secrets, and then there were lies, and I was lying. There was just bad choice after bad choice after bad choice, and I can go back and I can look at all of them. But it led up to the Tuesday night before I was going to debut this song. The board brings me up into the church and says, come down into the basement. We have to talk to you. I get down into this room, and there's a single chair over here, and there's 14 chairs over here. And they're all sitting down, and they just start in. And they're grilling me, and they're glaring at me, and they're saying awful things. You know, I had parents at this church say to me, you saved our kid. My son didn't have a dad to grow up with, and you became like that dad, and you helped my daughter not go on to start drinking and doing drugs. And I had all these really meaningful relationships, and they said all of that was for nothing. How dare you be here? In fact, they said, you need to leave, never contact anyone again. In fact, they told me that I was worthless. They actually said, you are not worthy of being a pastor. You're not worthy of being a professor. You're not worthy of stacking groceries on a grocery store shelf. Get your stuff from around the church and get out of here. And so I did. I don't know about you. When those sorts of things happen, I get mad. I can remember yelling at God on my drive away from there, but at the same time, I started asking questions. Questions I'd never asked before, questions I'd never been allowed to ask as a kid, and questions I'd chosen not to ask as an adult. I was at a university, after all, and there were all sorts of questions to be had. This is what professors are supposed to do. We're supposed to think and question. And this is the age of the internet. It's easy to find answers if you want to find them. If you go looking for bad answers, you're going to find bad answers. That's not hard. And I went looking. I wanted to see about science versus the flood. I wanted to see about whether a man could be swallowed by a whale and live. And there have been stories, but nobody was sure. I learned all these things along the way. And then I started learning, man, there have been pieces that were added to the Bible over time by scribes, likely. Sometime in the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd century, there were stories in the Bible I had preached from the pulpit at one time that they now knew shouldn't have been there. Because they found older scrolls, and in the older scrolls, they weren't there. So the disciples, the apostles, they didn't write those things. And the ethos for me just crumbled away. The trust and the credibility that I'd put in this book was going away. Then my family joined in. My parents were getting a divorce. My pastor father and pastor's wife mother were splitting up. Now, don't get me wrong, there was a lot of sin involved in that divorce. And there were things that shouldn't have happened that led to it. But when it happened, there were people in the church who were anxious, it seemed, for it to take place. They were like sharks circling chum in the water. For my dad, he was a great communicator. He's an amazing preacher. And he can really, really present God's word in an amazing way. But when that happens, I'm sure he makes people in the audience at times feel guilty. And over a lifetime, that had happened enough that the people who'd felt guilt said, now I gotcha. And so they kicked him out of the church. They kicked him out of being the interim president of Denver Seminary at the time. They said, go away and don't come back. Who will be Jesus to him? My mom actually walked away and said, you know what? I don't even know if I believe in God now. That's how I'm leaving this. So leave my family intact. I'm just going to go over here and do this. And she actually got a call from her ex-roommate in college. She and my dad had met at Philadelphia College of Bible. And so her roommate at the time, she called her and said, you know what, Lynn? I have to tell you a story. We had a guy at our church who left his family for another woman. And when that happened, we started to pray a hedge of thorns. That's a Bible reference. We started to pray a hedge of thorns around them. Because we knew that God wanted them to actually be together. And so we prayed a hedge of thorns around them so that this new relationship wouldn't do anything. And that woman that he left her for, after they got married, she developed cancer. And then she died. And he came crawling back to her, his wife, on his hands and knees, and she took him back, and now God has anointed that relationship. That's the way it's supposed to be. And she said, you know what, Lynn? I want you to know we're praying a hedge of thorns around you and Paul. Who will be Jesus to her? Well, now the gloves are off. My mom told me all kinds of stories that I had never heard before about the church that I grew up in. I started finding out about people who were deacons and board members in these lighthouse bastions of Christianity. And I found out they'd been having affairs along the way, that there was drug addiction and alcohol addiction and pornography addiction and all of these problems that were going on that I'd never had a clue about when I was in high school. And the ethos just crumbled like sand out of my fingers. All I had left was logos, my logic. That's all I had. The spoon-fed logic I'd been given. And then that started to get attacked. I met somebody I wasn't supposed to meet. I met what you might call a Christian unicorn, somebody who's not supposed to exist. See, I don't know about you, but if any of you were raised in church, you may have heard this before, that without God, without Christ in your life, without going to church every day, without reading the Bible every day, you don't have a moral center. You don't have a moral compass. You can't be a good person. You can't do good things. Those are the people who lie and cheat and steal whenever they can. And then I met somebody who was raised without church, who was raised without reading the Bible, who had only become a believer in Christ 6 months before, and she was the best human being I'd ever met. She actually was the most moral, ethical person I'd ever known, and it had nothing to do with church, and it had nothing to do with the Bible. She was just good because she wanted to be good for others. See, she didn't not lie because the Bible said not to lie. She didn't lie because that would hurt somebody else's feelings. She didn't not steal because church said not to steal. She did it because that would hurt somebody else. So she was just always trying to make the best decision she could in the moment based on what she knew to be right. She was at one of those life moments. This really amazing person was at one of those life moments that you wish you could go back and just savor. She was about to go into graduate school. She was about to become a teacher. She was about to get married, go on a honeymoon. She had all of her life was in front of her, and this amazingness was all right there. You know that moment that you have? That's where she was. And as I got to know her and I got to know her family, I was just in awe of these good people that weren't good for any reason other than they wanted to be good. And that's when, as often happens, bad things struck. She started to get sick. It started with some canker sores, mouth ulcers on her tongue, and then on her throat, and then on her cheeks, and then there were 10, 20, 30, 50 as they started making their way down her entire digestive tract. She started losing a ton of weight, and as she lost that weight, she actually got down to, she lost about a third of her body weight. She lost 10 pounds after that, had to be carried into the doctor's office and laid on a bed where they said, you're 12 hours from dying. Your organs are going to start shutting down if we don't get some fluids in you right away. And it was one of those times when you start asking the question, why? Why is this happening to such a good person? Now, I don't know about you. I don't know what it is that you say when you see stuff like that, but I can tell you what I said. I can tell you what I did. See, what I did was based on the fact that this was my wife, and I didn't know what to do. So I did something I'd never done before. And this is going to sound really awkward and weird and awful, but it's true. I prayed. Now you're probably thinking, how could you have gone all this time and not prayed? I prayed. I prayed when I was doing worship. I prayed when I was preaching. I prayed when I was doing Sunday school. But you know, that wasn't praying to me. That was preaching, essentially. That was telling others what you should be praying. When I was alone and by myself, I never prayed. And the reason that I never prayed is because I knew from the story of Jonah, from genie stories, I don't know, that God would sometimes give you what you want, but he would almost always and certainly try to give you what you need. And I always knew that what I needed was probably to learn a lesson, so I didn't want that. So I just didn't ask. I said, God, I'm going to kind of float under the radar over here. You're going to do what you're going to do anyway. You go do that. I'm just going to let you be so I can continue doing what I do. But for the first time, I prayed. And I really prayed. I got down on my hands and knees on my bed, and I folded my hands, and I wept sometimes. I prayed so long, so hard, and I said, God, if you're there, please, please help her find medicine that will cure her. And then she would get sicker. And I said, God, please help us find a doctor who will know what this is. And then she would get worse. I said, God, please, please help us just find a way to heal her. And then she would get worse. And this didn't go on for days, and this didn't go on for weeks, and it didn't go on for months. This went on for years. Until finally, I was praying, God, take her. She is sick of suffering, and she's ready to die. Take her home. Don't let her suffer anymore. And then she got a little bit worse. And I hearkened back again to Jonah, to that story where Jonah at the end, he's actually sitting out on a hill and he's looking at Nineveh, and he's mad. He's mad that they're not dead because they're the enemy. And that's why he didn't want to go there in the first place. He knew if he preached this prayer that said, hey, you need to reform, and if they did it, they wouldn't be killed. And that's exactly what happened. God honored that as he said he would. And he's ticked. And so God actually says to Jonah, he goes, Jonah, stop it. Don't you realize that I take care of the birds in the trees and the animals in the field? Why would I not love man, my greatest creation, above all of that? And I'm sitting there watching my wife die. And I'm thinking, are you taking care of that? I mean, this is the age of the Discovery Channel. I see this all the time. It seems like for survival of the fittest in the forest, and then I'm watching this happen in front of me. But the last logos straw, the last logic straw for me was this. I'd been taught throughout my entire existence growing up that money was a bad thing. Money just caused trouble, that, you know, the rich young man in the Bible that Jesus said, hey, give it all away and follow me, and he was sad because he didn't want to give it all away, and Jesus said that's what's going to stop him from getting into the kingdom of heaven. I mean, it's bad, right? Money is not something you should go for. So I went for a job that was not going to get me a lot of money. and I didn't save a ton. I gave a lot of it away, like I was always instructed to do. And then we had a doctor who said, hey, there's an experimental pill. We still don't know what's going on, but this pill might work for your wife. Problem is, it's an experiment, so the insurance won't cover it. It's going to cost you about $700 a pill, and you're going to have to take 3 of those a day for the rest of your life. I didn't have it. I didn't have the money. The family got together and tried to figure out how we could do something, but we couldn't afford it. And right then and there, I thought, forget this. No more. I've got to take life into my own hands. I actually stopped doing the professor thing. I started working for a company that helped colleges and universities, and I kind of sat out on the fringe on the side. And this company actually started moving me around the world. I was speaking to people. I was talking to 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 people about how to transform education. And I had all of these insights that I would bring because I researched it ferociously. And at the same time, I would pick up adjunct classes at colleges all over the U.S. And then I was teaching 2, 4, 7 courses some semesters just so that I could get a little extra money here and a little extra money there. And pretty soon that money started to work. We were able to try this medicine, and our insurance covered this thing. And then we got a doctor that figured out what was going on. And pretty soon things started falling into place. And it actually got to the point where they said to us, hey, you can do something we didn't think you'd ever get to do. And we said, what? And they said, we think if you want, your dosage is low right now, we think you might be able to get pregnant. And sure enough, we did. And we had our Addie, a girl who was never supposed to be here. We had her. And pathos came back into my heart for the first time, and it had nothing to do with the Bible, it had nothing to do with religion. I was connected to this little girl. So connected. I actually wrote a song when that happened. Welcome to the world, I can hear you crying, stop you crying now. Hey little girl, you go into the world, always know we're here, we're always loving you. And I was so excited because what I was doing was working. But, the best laid plans of men, right? My wife delivered, and as soon as she delivered, she had a rush of hormones in her body, and she got worse again. At least we knew what it was now. It was Crohn's disease. So we had medicines to try, and then she blew through that medicine, and then she blew through that medicine, and then she blew through that medicine, and pretty soon the doctors were exhausted. They said, we have nothing else to try. We want to do something radical. We think if we take out your entire large intestine, you might get some semblance of your life back. You will always have Crohn's, you'll always be sick, but you won't have it manifesting itself in your body. And so we tried. She did it. And sure enough, we got our life back. I wanted to do it, and that's exactly what was going on. See, I was still out there speaking like crazy. I was traveling 250,000 miles per year, and I was talking on behalf of this company who, quite honestly, I think that they were using me in a not too ethical way. I was talking about how to fix education, while meanwhile they were doing all the things I said not to do, and they were making a lot of money at it. I think they were like, hey, ignore the man behind the curtain. Focus on this shiny object over here. And I started feeling gross. And then I was missing my daughter growing up. And my wife is at home saying, I'm lonely. I'm sad. I'm lonely. I want you here. Stop traveling. Please stop. And I didn't listen, and I didn't listen, and I didn't listen. And then finally, just before it was over, we were on the edge. I finally said, okay, I hear you. I get it. Let's get out of here. Let's find a place where I can make a decent living. I don't have to take all the extra classes. I don't have to do the traveling. It's probably not going to happen in Colorado, which is where we were from, because the people don't leave Colorado. So we're going to have to find a job somewhere else. And so I started calling my network, and sure enough, I found somebody, a president in Florida, who said, yeah, come here. Be the chief innovation officer here at St. Leo here in Florida. And I said, yeah, Florida. That's it. That's gonna fix all of our problems. We're going to go to Florida, and the people are going to be different. We're finally going to have diversity for our daughter, which we really don't have much of that in Denver. And at the same time, we were getting ready to homeschool her because of some really bad stuff that happened in the public school. So my wife's got a credential, so she was just going to teach her, and there's lots of homeschool families around and lots of homeschool co-ops and stuff. It was going to be amazing. It was going to be all these great things. The people were going to help us. And then we got here, and we met the people. Do you know how often Florida is the butt of a joke? And my family started sending me Florida jokes. My brother-in-law had this hashtag Florida man going around his work, and I realized, man, what's going on here? Because my daughter wasn't exposed to diversity. For the first time, she was exposed to racism. We hadn't experienced that back in Colorado, not like that. At the same time, these homeschool groups were mostly cliques, or they just didn't seem to work out. And so my wife would take my daughter to these events, and it wasn't working, and it wasn't working, and it wasn't working, and it wasn't working. And they're not able to meet anyone. We actually had parents say to us at these events, we would go to soccer and dance and say, hey, our kids seem like they want to play. Can we get together for a play date? 2 parents said to us, my kid doesn't have time for play dates. Maybe try the Girl Scouts? We couldn't find a friend for her. And so this went on for month after month after month, and I would come home and my wife and daughter would be crying, please take us home, please take us home, please, we're lonely, we're lonely, we're lonely, and it wasn't working. And I was saying to my wife, please, get on Facebook, post something on Facebook, go to one of these homeschool co-ops, just say, look, we just need a friend. We don't need a learning experience, we don't need that, we just need a friend. And my wife was like, no, that's ridiculous, that's just pathetic, and I'm not pathetic, I'm not going to be pitiful like that. So one morning, I broke into her account, and I posted it for her. And it was pathetic. It was awful, all right? We got, 25 people who responded, and they said, hey, have you tried the Mosey? But one person wrote us and said, we have this church that uses the Orange curriculum. Now, we knew about the Orange curriculum. My dad had been telling us, you should find a place that has the Orange curriculum because it helps bring kids together through relationships. It's not just junior church, for kids. And we were interested in that. And that's exactly what this woman pointed us to. And so we thought, wow, that's interesting. Okay, we'll give this a shot. And so we came to Citrus Point. Now, I got to tell you, we did not come to Citrus Point for the reason a lot of people do. We didn't come here for the great music. And the music's amazing. But I didn't know any of it. I'd been out of that world for 10 years. I didn't know the songs. I didn't know the lyrics. They didn't sing them enough Sundays in a row for me to know the tune. And there were so many words in a verse, and I was like, oh, no. That's not why we came. And we also didn't come here for Andy Stanley. I know a lot of people know him. I knew who he was. I mean, he's the guy on After Saturday Night Live. He was a preacher's kid. I'm a preacher's kid. I knew that. But there were times that I would leave the service so angry. And I would say to Keena, I was like, this guy is a joke. He doesn't get it. I wanted to sit him down and have lunch with him and say, you know what, man, that guardrail stuff, I think you said some things that might be illegal. That's not appropriate. And I wanted to give him a piece of my mind and tell him why he was so wrong. We didn't come here for that. We came here for that little girl, and I secretly came here for my wife to find community. But that's not the important part. The important part is not why we came. The important part is why we stayed. Now, I told them I would stay if they found community, no matter what. I would tough it out. It would be fine. I could handle those Sunday mornings. But I didn't stay because they found community. I stayed because I did. I got to know Justin Grunewald, the pastor here. If you've not met him, get to know him. I got to tell you, the first time I met Justin, I said something horribly inappropriate to him. I can't believe I said this to him. We were at his new house, and I was helping him with a gutter. I was helping him dig out stuff of a gutter, and I started talking to him, and I was like, this is a pretty cool dude. I like this guy. We might be friends. And so I actually said this to him. I said, you know what, Justin? If you ever decide that all of this is stupid, that you want to leave your family, you want to leave the church, you want to leave all of this and go away, I'll still be your friend. You can count on me. Who says that to another human being? What horrible. I'm so glad Kristen let him continue to come out and play with me because she shouldn't have. And he just said, thank you. That's very kind. But see, that was just it. Justin allowed me to talk like that and to ask questions that were really hard. Not silly ones like, can God make a rock so big that he can't lift it? Not mental gymnastics, not that. Real questions, hard questions. Questions harder than even this. All right, that's just a joke. I had that. Real questions. I started in by saying, hey, do you know what kind of family life I've had? And I told him the story of my family and how awful my family was and how horrible that had gone. You know what he said? Oh my gosh, Jeff, I'm so sorry for you. That's awful. And he cried the night I told him about my family situation. A week later, I heard about his family of origin story. Don't ever play Who's Got a Worse Life with Justin when it comes to families. He's got cult activity, murder. I mean, you are not going to win that story competition. So I was like, oh, wow, I'm a jerk. I shouldn't have said that. Okay. All right, let me go this way. And I started looking for stuff to trip him up. I went back to ethos, logos, and pathos. I said, what about this stuff that was in the Bible? He said, yeah, I know. That's hard. That's really hard. And I said, what about these people over here? And he went, oh, I get it. I know what you're saying. And I could never trip him up. Sometimes he would go back and he would research and he would go, look, this is the best answer I've got. It's not perfect, but I understand why it's so unsatisfying, but this is what we've got. And he just let me ask questions. Real questions, hard questions. He actually said this to me, and I'll never forget this. Justin said to me, he goes, I said something about something in the Bible. He goes, you know, Jeff, I really wish God had never put that in the Bible. And I went, oh my gosh, the pastor said this? How can a pastor say that? And he said, because I get why a perfect God could put that in the Bible, but I got to tell you, an imperfect man sure has a hard time defending it. And I knew this guy was for real. And so I started coming to him with real questions, important questions. And that allowed me to go on a journey to be able to find the answers that I so desperately needed. See, I talked about pathos. And while I'm never going to be the guy that cries at a song probably very much anymore, my wife says I'm dead inside. That's just not the thing that speaks to me. But I still like the songs. I've gone back and downloaded all this cool stuff by Mercy Me. I still like them. Flawless is awesome. They sing Greater, and the kids like that. It's good. It's good music. But what does speak to me is this, logos. I was able to start asking questions about why. Why are we here? Why is this going on? Why did Christ have to die? Why Christianity? And you know where the answer was served up to me on a platter? In the best series I have ever heard in my life, having gone to church for 4 decades. I would love to take Andy Stanley to lunch today. And I'd like to thank him. And I'd like to say thank you for 2 things. One, for mentoring this guy who has helped me so much and for allowing him to come down here to Tampa to be our minister. And number 2, for giving a story of why Christianity never should have existed, but it does. That it's not about the law, it's about love. It was a new covenant. That story alone is why people should have faith in Jesus Christ. That story alone. But there's more to it for me than that. There's also ethos. When I think of ethos now, I don't think of the Bible, I don't think of church, I don't think of buildings, I don't think of that. I ask the question, who will be Jesus? You know who was Jesus in the first century? The people who saw Christ die. Why is that important? You can talk about them being martyred. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. It's hard to say. You can for sure say 4 people died because of their faith in Jesus, likely 6. But of those people, more so than how they died is how they lived. See, this was not just some cult moment. They weren't in a fervor after their leader came and gave them a cup of Kool-Aid and they said, drink the poison. It didn't happen like that. Their leader was gone. He died on the cross, and because of that, they wandered around the earth for decades preaching, saying love, love, love. They wandered around knowing they weren't going to make any money, knowing they were going to be imprisoned, knowing they were going to be beaten, knowing that they were going to have horrible things done to them, and then they died for their faith. Who will be Jesus to them? That's who started it. And that's why we're here today, because who will be Jesus to me was answered like this. It was Ray and Colleen taking us out to dinner for the first time from here and saying, hey, all that ranting you're doing, it's okay. Just come here. We're going to love you. It was my group allowing me in, saying, you know what? You're on a different journey than we are, but that's okay. The Parkers, the Lawhorns, Kelly, the mayor saying, hey, this is how we handle those things. We're not on the same exact journey, but we're gonna watch you and be there for you. It was our good friends, Ashley and Bill, going out to dinner and saying, "That's a great question. I've had that question." And me going, "What?" And them saying, "Yeah, let's explore that. Can we answer that question?" And it was Justin and Kristen, just loving us, saying, "It'll happen, we'll get there, your time will come, you'll figure it out, take all the time you need." And it was my wife, loving me, and saying, "It's okay, you'll get this, get there." Who was Jesus to me? You. Because the reason I stand before you today for the first time and say, I am a Christian, not because of the faith of my fathers, not because I was spoon-fed something, but actually because I was able to ask questions I had never been allowed to ask before. And it was okay. And the answers to those questions gave me a solid foundation for faith. My story is the story of us. I'd like to ask if you would indulge me in one last thing. I would love to sing that song that I never got to sing. It's called You Must Increase. It's by Matt Redman. I lift you high, I bow down low. How high can you be? How low can I go? I lift you high, I bow down low. How high can you be? How low can I go, Lord? I lift you high, I bow down low. How high can you be? How low can I go? I lift you high, I bow down low. How high can you be? How low can I go? You must increase, I must decrease, Lord. I'll bow down and you will be adored. Hallelujah to the Lord. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah to the Lord. I lift you high, I bow down low. How high can you be? How low can I go? I lift you high, I bow down low. How high can you be? How low can I go? You must increase, I must decrease, Lord. I'll bow down and you will be adored. Amen.
Jeff didn't tell me that last bit that he was going to share when we were going through what he was going to say. He said, I'm not going to say the last bit. So, let me end by reading what Jesus said when Saul said, who are you? Remember that? Jesus said, "Why are you persecuting me?" And Saul said, "Who are you, Lord?" And Jesus answered in a very powerful, very simple, very concise way. He said, "I am Jesus." And then the world was changed. So here's my hope. My hope for us as a church is that we will be Jesus to the people around us, to whoever, to wherever they're at, that we will be Jesus. Because when Jesus, the real Jesus, meets people, they changed. And it's still happening. So that's my hope. Won't you pray with me? God, thank you. Thank you that you are not what so many people have experienced from religion. You are not what so many people have experienced from the abuse of church and all of that. You are who you said you are in Jesus. When Jesus came, who he was, what he did, that's who you are. And God, my prayer for us is that we will be that in our own flawed nature, in our own inability to live up to all of that. God, would you help us as a church, as individuals, be Jesus to those around us. Thank you for Jeff and for Keena and for Addie. Thank you for the story. Thank you for what you've done in them. We're so grateful. In Jesus' name, amen.